Have you ever wondered how one of the largest migrations in human history unfolded? The West Bengal Riots of 1947 can give us a glimpse into this tumultuous period. It was a time when the world map was being redrawn and the Indian subcontinent was at the heart of it. The partition of India in 1947 led to the creation of two separate nations, India and Pakistan, divided along religious lines. This monumental event was not just a political division, but a deep, emotional rupture that tore apart millions of lives. West Bengal, once a province under British India, was cleaved into two. The eastern part became East Pakistan, now known as Bangladesh, while the western part remained with India. The line drawn on the map was not just a border, but a wound that bled violence and displacement. As the partition unfolded, people scrambled to move to areas where their religion was in the majority. This mass movement of people was accompanied by widespread violence, as fear and hatred took hold. The West Bengal Riots of 1947 were a part of this larger wave of communal violence that swept across the region. But what made these riots particularly brutal was the targeted attacks on religious minorities, especially Hindus. The violence was not just physical but a psychological assault, a terror that forced people to abandon their homes, their lives, their identities. One of the major catalysts for these riots and the subsequent exodus of Hindus from East Pakistan was the breakdown of law and order. The partition brought with it an influx of refugees, both Hindus and Muslims, fleeing violence in their respective regions. The sheer scale of this migration put immense pressure on the resources and infrastructure of the newly formed nations, leading to chaos and further violence. As two nations emerged from the ashes of British rule, the seeds of communal discord had already been sown. The partition and its aftermath had set in motion a cycle of violence and displacement that would leave an indelible mark on the history and psyche of the region. Imagine a world where law and order collapse, a world where fear and chaos reign. This was the reality for many in the wake of partition. The partition of India in 1947 triggered a massive influx of refugees, both Hindus and Muslims, fleeing violence from their respective regions. This sudden surge of people put a tremendous strain on the resources and infrastructure of the newly formed nations, pushing them to their breaking point. Imagine the streets teeming with displaced people, their lives uprooted and in disarray. Food, water, and shelter became scarce commodities. The existing systems of governance and law enforcement were simply not equipped to handle this crisis. The result was a breakdown of law and order, a vacuum that was quickly filled by fear, uncertainty, and conflict. In this maelstrom of confusion and desperation, the seeds of violence were sown. The pre-existing communal tensions, coupled with the pressures of displacement and resource scarcity, began to boil over. With no effective law enforcement to maintain order, the situation spiraled out of control. Disputes over resources, property, and identity transformed into violent clashes. The thin veneer of civility was stripped away, revealing a harsh reality of survival and confrontation. In the absence of law and order, the communal divisions were starkly exposed. The riots began as sporadic incidents of violence but soon escalated into widespread attacks on religious minorities, particularly Hindus. Homes were looted, neighborhoods were targeted, and lives were lost in this frenzy of violence and chaos. The breakdown of law and order was not just a failure of governance, but a catalyst for the communal violence that would engulf the region. The absence of effective law enforcement, combined with the pressures of displacement and resource scarcity, created a powder keg of tension and conflict. And once the spark was lit, it was only a matter of time before it exploded into full-blown riots. In the midst of chaos, the flames of communal violence began to spread. The West Bengal Riots of 1947 were not just a product of religious conflict, but a tragic consequence of a breakdown of law and order, a reflection of a society pushed to its limits by the pressures of partition. But what stoked these flames? The answer lies in the political unrest of the time. The partition of India was a monumental event, but it came with its share of political upheaval. One of the major points of contention was the division of Bengal. The western part became a part of India, while the eastern part was integrated into East Pakistan. This decision was deeply unpopular among Bengalis, who shared a strong cultural and linguistic bond. The division was seen as an artificial separation, a political maneuver that tore apart a unified community. This discontent was not just passive dissatisfaction, it was a potent anger that simmered beneath the surface. And when the partition came into effect, this anger found an outlet in the form of communal violence. The political factors, the resentment over the division of Bengal, and the overall discontentment with the partition, all of these factors contributed to the riots. Political unrest added fuel to the fire, exacerbating communal tensions. In a world gripped by fear and division, violence soon reared its ugly head. The West Bengal riots of 1947 were not merely random acts of violence, but a brutal manifestation of communal tensions that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. In particular, the attacks on Hindus were especially vicious, a horrifying spectacle of humanity's capacity for cruelty. Neighborhoods predominantly inhabited by Hindus bore the brunt of the attacks. Homes were plundered, possessions were seized, and entire neighborhoods were set ablaze, turning once peaceful communities into terrifying infernos overnight. But the violence was not confined to property. Many Hindus were mercilessly killed, their lives cut short in a terrifying wave of communal hatred. Men, women, and children alike fell prey to the violence, their lives brutally ended simply because of their religious identity. Areas with a mixed population of Hindus and Muslims were particularly volatile. Here, the tensions ran deeper, fueled by years of coexistence marred by underlying mistrust and resentment. The riots in these regions were incredibly severe, with the brutality escalating to frightening levels. The violence was not just physical but also psychological, instilling a deep-seated fear and trauma in the survivors. Those who escaped the violence were not unscathed. They carried with them not just the physical wounds, but also the mental scars of witnessing such horrific acts of violence. The terror was so intense that many Hindus were forced to abandon their homes, their lives, and their identities, fleeing in search of safety. This was not a sporadic outbreak of violence, but a systematic and organized series of attacks, meant to instill fear and assert dominance. The underlying motive was not just to inflict physical harm, but also to exert psychological control, to send a clear message that they were no longer safe in their own homes. The violence left a trail of destruction in its wake, forever changing the lives of those who survived. A once thriving community was brought to its knees, its members scattered, its spirit broken. The riots were not just a moment in history, but a turning point that marked the end of an era and the beginning of a new, uncertain future. In the wake of such brutality, millions were forced to flee their homes, marking one of the largest migrations in history. This massive exodus of Hindus from East Pakistan was a direct result of the violence and persecution they faced. These individuals, families, entire communities were driven out of their homes, forced to leave behind everything they knew and embark on a perilous journey towards uncertain futures. Their destination? West Bengal, a region that, although part of their country of origin, was now a foreign land, a place where they were refugees. This influx of individuals searching for safety wasn't a trickle, it was a flood. Millions of people poured into West Bengal, bringing with them the trauma of their experiences and the desperate need for shelter, food, and security. The impact on West Bengal was immediate and overwhelming. Resources that were already stretched thin were now expected to accommodate millions more. The infrastructure of the state, unprepared for such a sudden influx, buckled under the strain. Overcrowding became a significant issue, with homes, schools, hospitals, and public spaces teeming with refugees. The job market, too, struggled to absorb the new arrivals, leading to soaring unemployment rates. But it wasn't just physical resources that were strained. The social fabric of West Bengal was also put under immense pressure. The refugees brought with them their cultures, traditions, and experiences, all of which had to be integrated into the existing social order. This led to tensions between the refugees and the local population, further exacerbating the challenges faced by the state. Yet, amidst this turmoil, the refugees also became a potent political force. They brought with them not just their needs, but their voices and their votes. Their presence and their experiences began to influence elections and shape government policies, leaving an indelible mark on the political landscape of West Bengal. The exodus from East Pakistan not only reshaped the demographics of West Bengal, but also left an indelible mark on its political landscape. The repercussions of this massive human migration are still felt today, in the stories, the memories, and the political and social fabric of West Bengal. The West Bengal riots of 1947 and the subsequent exodus left a tragic legacy that continues to resonate today. The violence and displacement that occurred during this time have etched deep scars on the collective memory of the region's people. These tragic episodes served as a painful reminder of the fragility of communal harmony, shaping attitudes and perceptions for generations. The legacy of the riots has also been felt in the political sphere. The influx of refugees from East Pakistan transformed the political landscape of West Bengal. These new inhabitants became a formidable political force, influencing elections and government policies. The demographics of the region also changed dramatically, altering the social fabric. These shifts continue to hold sway over the region's political and social dynamics. As we reflect on these events, we are reminded of the enduring impact of history on our present and future.